Today's gospel, really the whole Mass today, has one simple message for us. But it's a life-changing and very important message, and it's this: Jesus is the only one who can satisfy your deepest desires. Only Him. And Jesus wants you and I and His disciples and everybody to come to know this truth, because He longs for you to be happy. And He longs for you to know that as long as you search for something else to satisfy your desires, you'll never be truly happy. And so how does Jesus teach us to this? Jesus allows His disciples to experience a very common human experience. Maybe you've experienced it before. That is, you ever felt overwhelmed, discouraged, like there was way too much in life that you could handle? This happens to me every time I take a day off as a bishop, because when I come back from my day off, I have 150 unanswered emails, plus a whole full day of appointments. So there's no way to answer those, and I feel, if I allow myself, overwhelmed, discouraged, like there's way more here than I can handle. I remember one profound experience of this feeling when I was a sophomore in high school. Any sophomores here this morning? Sophomores in high school? Got to be sophomores. Very good. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I tried out for the school musical. Now, I went to a big public high school, about 2,000 students, and the musical in my high school was a big deal. In order to get a lead role or some important role, you had to actually train for the musical. So, for example, I had to take tap dancing lessons. I can still tap dance, but I'm not going to do it for you. I had to take tap dancing lessons in order to be able to try out for what was kind of an elite dance team that was going to be part of this year's musical. They were looking for 6 men. We even had a kind of professional musical director. He had been on Broadway, and so he was always putting on great shows. So I tried out to be one of these 6 male dancers for the school musical. And in fact, I knew that I was probably the second best out of all the guys who tried out. There was just one problem. You see, I was 4'9" and I weighed 69 pounds. So you can imagine what it would have looked like if you had a dance team of 6 guys, who are all between, 5'6" and 6 feet tall, and then you had one guy who was a foot shorter than the rest of them. This would have been a problem. And so even though I was as good or better a dancer than most of the people who tried out, I didn't get the part because I was too short. That was, for me, a very discouraging moment. And I remember saying to my mother after that moment, saying, "It's not fair. I'm actually better than them." And you know what her answer was? Answer I always hated. She said, "Life's not fair." And she was right. It was a very painful moment for me. I felt rejected. I felt like I was nothing. I felt like I wasn't as good as everybody else just because of my size, and that was beyond my control. That was the way God had made me. I felt very disappointed, and I felt like life was not fair. And it's not fair. You see, if you're looking for happiness in this world, for life to be fair, for things to go the way you think they should go, it won't happen. This world will always leave you disappointed. It's always too much. And I had to learn that if I was going to look for my happiness in success in this world, I was going to be disappointed. And it was a very good lesson to learn. Now let's talk about today's gospel. Jesus is there on the hillside on the shores of the Sea of Galilee with 5,000 people. We're 2,000 here this morning, or roughly 2,000 people. So more than twice as many people who are in this room. And as they just begin to sit down on this huge hillside in the middle of the day, far away from the city, Jesus turns to His apostles, who've been with Him all along. He says, why don't you prepare a meal for all these people? Now imagine if I went to one of you and said, why don't you just feed all these people? 2,000, 5,000 people. And of course, the response was, Lord, that is a ridiculous request. Now, Philip didn't say it that way. What did he say? How could we possibly find enough food to feed all these people? And then there's Andrew. I always like Andrew because that's my name, right? Andrew, who says, well, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish here. I'm sure that'll work, Jesus. Now, actually, I find that oftentimes in those circumstances, when I feel completely overwhelmed and like God's asking me to do something I can't do, my reaction is sometimes to say, well, okay, I got 5 loaves, 2 fish. Okay, you get a little bit, you get a little bit. I just start trying to do it on my own strength. But what does Jesus want? He wants us to realize that He is the one who can do it. He is the one who can satisfy our deepest desires. And so He puts us in situations that seem impossible or that might disappoint us, so that in that situation, when we have nothing, because life's not fair, we'll turn to Him and we'll allow Him to provide for us. Now, of course, we know that what Jesus did on that mountainside, when He took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed 5,000 people, so much so that there was 12 baskets left over, we know that that miracle was a small foreshadowing of a much greater miracle. A much greater miracle that Jesus would do the night before He died. Because the night before He died, Jesus would take bread and wine, and He would say over that bread, "This is my body given up for you." And He would say over the wine, "This is my blood poured out for you." And that bread and that wine would be transformed into the very body and blood of Jesus, so that He could, throughout all time, in every place, in every country on earth today, He could satisfy the deepest desire of every heart by feeding you not with bread and fish, which will still leave you hungry, but with His very life, His body and blood, His life poured out for you, because that's the one thing that can satisfy your deepest desire. Brothers and sisters, much greater than the miracle He performed on that hillside is the miracle that's going to happen in a few moments on this altar. The same miracle that's happened every Sunday all over the world, that will happen all over the world this morning. The miracle of ordinary bread and ordinary wine being transformed into the body and blood of Jesus through the words of Jesus said by a priest. Sometimes the reason people don't experience their desires being satisfied in Jesus is because they don't understand the Eucharist. How many people come to our churches? How many times have you and I come to church and not fully been aware of what happens here on this altar? You see, brothers and sisters, Jesus is God, and His word is true. And when Jesus says, "This is my body," then that bread becomes the body of Jesus. And when He says, "This is my blood," that wine becomes the blood of Jesus. In such a way that there is no more bread there, no more wine there. What's there? Jesus is there, body, blood, soul, and divinity. His whole life becomes present under the appearances of bread and under the appearances of wine. Why would he do that? Because he wants to feed your soul. He wants to satisfy your deepest desire. He wants you to know intimately that you are loved and known by him. And that's the one thing, the only thing that will satisfy your deepest desire. Brothers and sisters, it all depends on what you believe. You see, you won't receive the love that Jesus wants to give you unless you have faith. Jesus will be present whether or not you have faith. But you won't be able to receive the love that he wants to fill your heart with unless when you come forward, you believe. This is why Sunday Mass is so important. It's why it's required for Catholics to go to Mass every Sunday. Because here, every Sunday, Jesus pours out his life for us. Even every day, if we can go. It's why coming to communion is such a big deal for us. It's why we require that if people have serious sin, they go to confession first. Because we're coming here to receive Jesus. Brothers and sisters, it cost Jesus his life to give us the Eucharist. He poured out his life on the cross so that he could share his life with you through the Eucharist. And so we should never receive it lightly. And so as you come forward this morning, I just ask you this question. Do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus is really here in the Eucharist and wants to satisfy your deepest desire? I can tell you for myself that growing up, I did always believe that Jesus was present in the Eucharist. I was taught it at a young age, and I always believed it. But there was a moment in my life when I had a doubt. And it was about 3 months before I was ordained a priest. You see, what happened was as I was practicing Mass and I was thinking about what happens at Mass, I thought to myself, I've always found it easy to believe that Jesus was really present here when someone else, a priest, said those words. But will I believe when I say those words the first time? And it was a bit of a moment for me where I prayed to the Lord that I would be able to believe that. I can honestly tell you, though, that the day I celebrated my very first Mass, it would have been June 1st, 1997. I was ordained on May 31st. And my first Mass was at our cathedral here in St. Paul. And the first time that I held up that host, and then I laid it down on the altar after saying the words of consecration, and then I genuflected, as I will do here in just a few moments, there was no doubt in my mind that I was genuflecting before Jesus Christ, the living Son of God, the one who wants to satisfy every desire present here. My prayer for you this morning is that you will open your heart to receive that Jesus so he can satisfy your desire.